The Reluctant Alliance. Admiral Lizara Vextal stared at the holographic display with all four of her iridescent eyes, narrowed in what her species, the Iktari, considered the ultimate expression of skepticism. The massive tactical table projected the grim reality of the galactic Concord situation. 38 star systems lost in 18 months, billions of lives extinguished, and the seemingly unstoppable advance of the Void Dominion's high fleets. "And you believe these humans can help us?" she asked, her translator struggling to keep the disdain from her harmonically layered voice. A species that discovered faster than light travel barely 70 years ago. High Chancellor Zrel, the ancient Medusan whose crystalline body refracted light in complex patterns of diplomatic deference, gestured with three of his upper limbs in a motion that signified resigned acceptance. "They are our last hope, Admiral. The strategic algorithmic intelligence is quite clear. We have exhausted all conventional options. Our fleets are decimated, our defensive grids compromised. The Dominion adapts to every tactic we deploy with terrifying efficiency. And what makes these primates special?" Lizara's secondary vocal sacs inflated slightly, a sign of agitation among the Iktari. "Their technological development index is barely level 4. Their ships use combustion elements, Chancellor. Combustion." The third figure in the command chamber, Science Director Nor 7, a cybernetically enhanced representative of the collective Tauran consciousness, stepped forward. Unlike the others, Nor 7's form was utilitarian, a humanoid frame of polished obsidian housing, a quantum processing core that linked to the greater Tauran network. "The humans possess something our models cannot quantify, Admiral," Nor 7 stated, the lights along its chassis pulsing in rhythm with its speech. "In our observation of their brief interstellar history, they have repeatedly overcome superior forces through what they term innovative thinking. Their neural pathways function differently." "Differently," Lizara repeated flatly. "We're betting the survival of 26 civilizations on differently. We've analyzed their conflicts." Nor 7 continued, unfazed by the Admiral's skepticism. "Humans demonstrate a remarkable capacity for what they call lateral thinking, approaching problems from unconventional angles. Additionally, they exhibit behavior patterns that defy optimal decision matrices." "You mean they're irrational," Lizara translated. "Unpredictable," the Chancellor corrected. "And unpredictability may be the one thing the Dominion cannot counter." The conversation halted as the chamber's alert system pulsed a soft blue. "The human delegation has arrived, Chancellor," announced the ship's sentient interface. Lizara straightened her ceremonial mantle, the bioluminescent patches along her exoskeleton brightening automatically. "An evolutionary response to potential conflict. Let's see what our saviors look like then." The doors to the command chamber parted with a whisper of displaced air, and 3 humans entered. Lizara had studied their physiognomy, of course. Bipedal mammals with bilateral symmetry, limited sensory capabilities, and dismally short lifespans. But seeing them in person was different. They seemed so fragile. The lead human stepped forward, and Lizara noted with interest that this one was female, according to their binary sex differentiation. She was of average height for their species, with skin the color of rich soil and facial features that Lizara's cultural database identified as presenting a heritage from the Earth region designated East Asia. "High Chancellor Zrel, Admiral Vextal, Director Nor 7, the human said with a formal bow that showed she had at least attempted to study Concord protocols. "I am Captain Maya Chen of the Earth Alliance vessel Audacity. These are my senior officers, Commander Jackson and Lieutenant Commander Okafor." Lizara noted that despite their matching uniforms, deep blue with silver insignia, each human carried themselves differently. The one called Jackson stood with rigid formality, while Okafor moved with a fluid grace that reminded her, uncomfortably, of the predatory species on her own homeworld. "Captain Chen." Chancellor Zrel's voice carried the formal tones of welcome that the translator rendered perfectly. "The Galactic Concord thanks you for answering our call. We came as quickly as we could assemble a response fleet, Chancellor. 26 ships, our best and brightest. Chen's expression remained composed, but Lysara detected micro-expressions of concern, the subtle tightening around the eyes, the minimal tension in the jaw muscles. 26. Lysara couldn't help but interject. The Dominion destroyed 300 of our most advanced vessels in the Proxima Centauri engagement alone. To her surprise, the human didn't flinch. With respect, Admiral, my understanding is that those 300 ships were destroyed while following standard Concord battle doctrine, Chen replied. We don't intend to make the same mistake. Nor 7's lights pulsed rapidly, the Tauran equivalent of raised eyebrows. You've studied our tactical approach. Extensively, the human called Jackson spoke for the first time. His voice was deeper, his skin several shades lighter than Chen's. Your battle formations are mathematically perfect, your resource allocation optimized to 15 decimal places, and your response algorithms are elegant beyond anything we've developed. And yet we're losing, Lysara stated flatly. Yes, Chen agreed without hesitation, because perfection is predictable. Something in the human's tone caught Lysara's attention. Not arrogance, exactly, but an assurance that seemed incongruous with their technological inferiority. Perhaps we should continue this discussion while viewing your vessels, Chancellor Zrel suggested, gesturing toward the observation deck. Your ships have just entered our security perimeter. As they moved to the vast, transparent viewport that dominated one wall of the chamber, Lysara felt a flicker of curiosity despite herself. The humans walked with a purpose that belied their species' youth. Chen, in particular, moved with the confident cadence of someone accustomed to command. When they reached the viewport, however, Lysara's secondary heart nearly stopped. What in the 7 moons are those? She demanded, all pretense of diplomatic courtesy forgotten. Beyond the viewport lay the most hodgepodge collection of vessels Lysara had ever witnessed in her 3 centuries of military service. The human ships were of wildly varying designs, some sleek and angular, others bulbous and asymmetrical. One appeared to be partially constructed from what her scanner identified as wood, of all things, while another was essentially a massive cylinder ringed with what appeared to be primitive projectile weapons. That's our fleet, Chen said, a hint of pride in her voice. 26 ships from 26 nations of Earth. They're all different. Nor 7 observed, its processing lights blinking in what might have been confusion. Of course they are. Lieutenant Commander Okafor spoke now, her voice carrying melodic undertones that reminded Lysara oddly of the song marshes of her homeworld. Unity doesn't require uniformity, Director. But the inefficiency, Lysara protested. The lack of standardization alone would create logistical nightmares. How do you coordinate? Where are the system's redundancies? Captain Chen turned to face the Admiral directly. With respect, Admiral, perhaps that's why the Concord called on us. Your ships are identical, your tactics are identical, and the Void Dominion has learned to counter that identity perfectly. Lysara felt her chromatophores flush with indignation. Our ships represent the pinnacle of engineering efficiency, and that's exactly the problem. Chen interrupted gently. The Dominion uses emergent swarm intelligence. It recognizes patterns and adapts. But humans, she smiled slightly. We're messy. We're inefficient. We build ships based on cultural aesthetics as much as engineering principles. We disagree, loudly and often, about the right way to do things. And this helps us how, exactly? Lysara demanded. Chen pointed to the strangest vessel in the human fleet, a ship shaped bizarrely like an aquatic creature from Earth's oceans, with protruding structures that served no apparent aerodynamic purpose. That's the Leviathan, Admiral. Designed by the Pacific Alliance, its weapon systems use principles of thermal conversion that your engineers would consider obsolete. Next to it is the African Federation's Ubuntu Spirit, which employs gravitational sling technologies based on principles your scientists abandoned centuries ago. Outdated technologies will not defeat the Dominion, Lizara stated flatly. No, Chen agreed, but unpredictable ones might. The Dominion has adapted to counter your perfect, predictable fleets. It hasn't encountered ships that operate on completely different principles, with captains who make decisions based on intuition as often as logic. Intuition. Noor 7 repeated, as if tasting an unfamiliar concept. You mean emotional response. I mean human judgment, Chen corrected. Something that can't be reduced to an algorithm. Chancellor Zrell's crystalline body shifted, catching the light in what Lizara recognized as patterns of deep consideration. What do you propose, Captain Chen? Let us study the Dominion's attack patterns. Let us integrate with your remaining fleet. And then, Chen's expression hardened in a way that Lizara found surprisingly compelling. Let us show you how humans fight when our backs are against the wall. And if you fail, Lizara challenged. Chen looked directly at her, and for the first time, Lizara saw something ancient in those alien eyes, something that reminded her that despite their technological youth, humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other before reaching the stars. Then we die together, Admiral. But humans have a saying. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Void Dominion threatens everything, your worlds and ours. We may be your last resort, but we're also fighting for our own survival now. A heavy silence fell over the observation deck as they all contemplated the human fleet, tiny, primitive, hopelessly outmatched by any rational assessment. And yet, Lizara found herself wondering if perhaps rationality was precisely what had failed the Concorde so far. Very well, Captain Chen, she finally said, her voice heavy with the weight of billions of lives, depending on this desperate gamble. Show us how humans fight. The ghost of a smile touched Chen's lips. With pleasure, Admiral. First lesson. Humans don't always play by the rules. As if on cue, 3 of the human ships executed a maneuver that Lizara's tactical training insisted was impossible given their structural limitations. Her secondary heart skipped again. Perhaps there was something to this differently after all. Unconventional tactics. The Concorde flagship Eternal Vigilance hummed with an energy it hadn't known in months. Where once the massive vessel's corridors had echoed with the quiet efficiency of a military facing extinction, now they buzzed with confused activity as humans integrated into various departments, bringing with them what Captain Chen had called fresh perspectives, and what Admiral Lizara privately considered organized chaos. The tactical center had been transformed most dramatically. The Concorde's holographic displays now projected a bewildering array of information streams that Lizara could barely follow. Multicolored pathways crisscrossing battle simulations, probability matrices that shifted constantly, and strangest of all, representations of Void Dominion movements that resembled abstract art more than military intelligence. What exactly am I looking at, Commander Jackson? Lizara asked, trying to keep the irritation from her multitonal voice as she gestured at the central display. The human male stood with hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid in a way that Lizara had come to recognize as military formality across species. Pattern recognition, Admiral, Jackson replied, his voice crisp. Lieutenant Rodriguez has adapted Earth's EMPATH system to analyze Dominion fleet movements across all engagements in the past 18 months. EMPATH. Lizara's upper eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of confusion. Emergent movement pattern analysis and tactical heuristics supplied a shorter human female who approached from a nearby workstation. I'm Rodriguez. The system was originally developed to predict migration patterns of endangered species on Earth, then repurposed for counterterrorism. Lizara stared at the swirling patterns with renewed interest. You're treating the Dominion as an ecological system rather than a military opponent. Exactly. Rodriguez nodded, her hands dancing across the interface controls. Swarm intelligences follow behavioral patterns similar to biological systems. They appear chaotic up close but reveal distinct patterns when viewed at scale. She gestured, and the display zoomed out to show hundreds of battle encounters simultaneously. Suddenly, Lizara could see it, repeating patterns in the Dominion's maneuvers, fractalized across different scales and timeframes. They're using a modified Locke Volterra predation model, Rodriguez continued. Their tactics evolve in response to prey behavior. Your tactics, Admiral. But the underlying mathematical structure remains consistent. Lizara felt her chromatophores flush with something between embarrassment and revelation. We've been applying the wrong analytical framework. Not wrong, Captain Chen said, entering the tactical center with Chancellor Zrel and Director Noor 7 in tow. Just too perfect. The Concorde's military doctrine is based on optimal response patterns. The Dominion has been feeding on that predictability. Noor 7's processing lights pulsed rapidly. Our strategic algorithms were designed to identify and implement the statistically optimal response in any scenario, which is exactly the problem, Jackson said. Optimality creates patterns. Patterns can be predicted. The Chancellor's crystalline form shifted into what Lizara recognized as a configuration of deep consideration. What do you propose instead? Chen smiled, that unsettling human expression that revealed their peculiar bone structure. Controlled chaos. She gestured, and the tactical display shifted to show the human fleet, now integrated with the remaining Concorde vessels in configurations that violated every principle of battlefield geometry Lizara had ever studied. This is tactically unsound. Lizara objected immediately. Your formation has intentional gaps, asymmetrical power distribution, and leaves critical systems exposed. Yes, Chen agreed without apology. Because the Dominion will expect us to protect those systems at all costs. You're using your own vessels as bait, Noor 7 observed, lights flickering in what might have been alarm. We're creating what humans call a shell game, Chen explained, making the Dominion focus on what they think we value most, while our actual strategy operates elsewhere. And what is that strategy? Chancellor Zrel asked, his normally melodious voice carrying an undertone of apprehension. Chen exchanged glances with Jackson and Rodriguez before answering. A combination of approaches drawn from Earth's military history, guerrilla warfare, asymmetric engagement, and psychological operations. Psychological operations, Lizara repeated skeptically, against a hive mind. Even collective intelligences have systemic vulnerabilities, Commander Jackson explained. They process information through networked nodes. Disrupt enough nodes simultaneously with contradictory data streams, and you can create what we call decision paralysis. Lizara's secondary heart rate increased as she began to understand. You're not trying to defeat them through superior firepower. We can't, Chen acknowledged frankly, but we can confuse them, divide them, and force them to make mistakes. The tactical center doors slid open again as Lieutenant Commander Okafor entered, accompanied by a delegation of Concorde engineers who appeared to be in various states of distress. Okafor herself, however, seemed perfectly at ease. Captain, she announced with barely contained excitement, the retrofits to the Iktari frigates are complete. The engineers here have concerns. The lead Concorde engineer, a Volari whose tentacular appendages were writhing in what Lizara recognized as extreme agitation, stepped forward. These modifications violate 600 years of propulsion theory, he exclaimed. The humans have introduced deliberate inefficiencies into our drive systems. Controlled variance, Okafor corrected smoothly. We've recalibrated your drive signatures to create individualized emission patterns. No two ships will register identically on Dominion sensors now. But the energy waste, the engineer began, is minimal compared to the tactical advantage, Chen interjected firmly. The Dominion identifies Concorde vessels by their perfect emission signatures. Now they'll have to work harder to track individual ships. Lizara found herself nodding slowly as the logic, the strange, counterintuitive human logic, began to make sense. You're making our fleet messier. Exactly, Chen said with evident approval. Messier, less predictable, harder to categorize. We're adding noise to the signal. This approach contradicts 10,000 years of unified Concord military doctrine. Nor 7 stated, though Lizara noted the Tauran didn't actually object. Chen's expression softened slightly. With respect, Director, that doctrine was developed fighting conventional enemies. The Dominion is different. It learns, adapts, and uses your own patterns against you. To defeat it, we need to break those patterns. A test, Chancellor Zerl suggested, his crystalline form refracting light in patterns of cautious hope. A limited engagement to evaluate the human approach. Chen and Lizara exchanged glances, and for perhaps the first time, found themselves in perfect agreement. The Koros sector, Lizara suggested. The Dominion established a forward operating base there 3 cycles ago. It's strategically valuable but not critical to either side. Small enough to be manageable, important enough that they'll defend it, Chen agreed with a nod. Perfect for a proof of concept. 3 days later, Admiral Lizara stood on the bridge of the Eternal Vigilance, watching the final preparations for what the humans had casually termed Operation Curveball, a reference to some ancient Earth sport that apparently involved deliberate deception. "All ships report ready, Admiral," announced her first officer, Commander Thrill. "Though I must note that several captains have expressed reservations about the battle plan." "Noted," Lizara replied dryly. "Remind them that reservations are a luxury the Concord can no longer afford." The bridge doors parted as Captain Chen arrived, now wearing a modified version of her Earth Alliance uniform that incorporated elements of Concord battle dress, a symbolic gesture that Lizara grudgingly appreciated. "Admiral." Chen nodded respectfully. "My people are in position aboard their assigned vessels. Commander Jackson is coordinating from the Audacity, and Lieutenant Commander Okafor has integrated with your engineering course." "And you?" Lizara asked, noting that Chen carried what appeared to be a personal sidearm, a curiously primitive projectile weapon rather than the energy-based defensive tools used throughout the Concord. Chen patted the weapon with a half smile. "I'll be joining your tactical team here, if that's acceptable. I thought you might appreciate keeping an eye on me personally." Lizara's chromatophores rippled in what humans might interpret as amusement. "A wise precaution, Captain. I've learned that humans are most dangerous when left unsupervised." "You have no idea," Chen murmured, taking position at an auxiliary tactical station. The massive viewports showed the combined fleet, 37 Concord vessels of varying classes now arranged in what Chen had called a dynamic cluster formation, rather than the traditional geometric configurations. Interspersed among them were the 26 human ships, still jarring in their diversity of design. "Fleet is approaching jump coordinates," Commander Thrill announced. "Transition to hyperspace in 30 seconds." Lizara performed the traditional Ikteri pre-battle meditation, her 4 eyes closing briefly as she centered herself. When she opened them, she found Chen watching her with undisguised curiosity. "A focusing ritual?" the human asked. "Something like that," Lizara acknowledged. "Do humans have similar traditions?" Chen's expression shifted to something more somber. "Many. Some pray. Some think of loved ones. Some recite poems or mantras." She touched the weapon at her side again. "Some just check their equipment one more time." Before Lizara could respond, the distinctive pull of hyperspace transition washed over the bridge, and the starfield outside elongated into streams of light. For several minutes, there was silence save for the soft hum of the ship's systems and the occasional status update from bridge officers. Then, with a flash, they emerged into the Koros sector, directly into the heart of the Dominion forward base. "Contact," shouted the sensor officer. "Multiple Dominion vessels detected. Defensive grid activating." The tactical display flared to life, showing the Dominion response. Dozens of their distinctive biomechanical vessels swarming from concealed positions among the sector's asteroid fields and abandoned mining facilities. "Right on schedule," Chen noted with satisfaction. "They're deploying exactly as Rodriguez predicted. Indeed, the Dominion vessels were arranging themselves in attack formations that matched the simulations from the EMPATH system with eerie precision. Curious, Lizara observed, they appear to be preparing a standard envelopment pattern. Because that's what they expect us to be vulnerable to, based on previous Concord tactics, Chen explained. Now, watch. At Chen's signal, the combined fleet executed what could only be described as coordinated chaos. Instead of forming defensive screens or counterattack formations, the ships scattered in seemingly random directions. But Lizara could see the underlying purpose. Each movement created gaps that tempted Dominion pursuers, only to expose them to crossfire from vessels that shouldn't logically have been in position to assist. Dominion command node identified, called out the tactical officer. Bearing 047, range 300,000 kilometers. Now, Chen said softly, and Lizara gave the order. Execute Phase 2. Immediately, 5 of the human vessels, including the bizarre wooden-hulled ship that Lizara had initially dismissed as primitive, accelerated toward the Dominion command node. Rather than firing conventional weapons, they began broadcasting on frequencies that precisely matched Dominion communication patterns. What are they transmitting? Lizara demanded. Chen's smile was predatory. Contradictory command sequences, tactical assessments that don't match reality, and some Shakespeare for good measure. Shakespeare, ancient Earth dramatist, very emotional, thought it might give their logic circuits indigestion. On the tactical display, the effect was immediate and startling. The perfectly coordinated Dominion swarm began to show signs of confusion. Some vessels accelerated while others halted. Firing patterns became erratic, and in several cases, Dominion ships actually collided with each other. Their distributed decision-making network is experiencing information conflict, Chen explained, watching the chaos with evident satisfaction. Each node is receiving different instructions and can't establish consensus. Lizara felt her chromatophores brighten with cautious hope. They're vulnerable. Momentarily, Chen agreed. Now comes the hammer. At her words, the remaining human vessels executed a maneuver that Lizara's tactical training insisted was suicidal. They accelerated directly into the heart of the largest concentration of Dominion ships. They'll be destroyed, Lizara protested. But instead of firing conventional weapons, the human ships released thousands of tiny objects, barely larger than escape pods, that attached themselves to Dominion vessels. Boarding parties, Lizara asked in disbelief. Not exactly, Chen replied. Viral hardware, another concept from Earth's history. Those devices are physically altering the Dominion ship's external communication arrays, not destroying them, just introducing noise. On the tactical display, the effect rippled through the Dominion fleet like a contagion. Ship after ship began showing signs of command confusion, their movements becoming increasingly erratic. Now, Admiral, Chen said with quiet intensity, while they're disorganized, hit them with everything conventional you've got. Lizara didn't hesitate. All Concord vessels concentrated fire on designated targets. Maximum yield. The combined firepower of 37 Concord warships, each individually more powerful than any human vessel, lanced through space, striking Dominion ships that for the first time in the war failed to coordinate their defensive measures effectively. The result was devastating. In less than 20 minutes, the Dominion presence in the Koras sector had been reduced by 70%. The remainder, displaying what could only be described as panic, a concept Lizara had never associated with the coldly efficient Dominion, retreated in disarray. As the bridge erupted in cautious celebration, Lizara turned to Chen, finding herself at a loss for words. The human captain simply nodded. That, Admiral, is how humans fight when we're outmatched. We change the rules. It was, Lizara searched for the appropriate term, messy. Messy works, Chen replied with a shrug. The Dominion expects perfection because that's what they've always encountered from the Concord. They have no framework for handling creative disorder. For the first time since the war began, Lizera felt something dangerously close to hope. The question now is whether they can adapt to your methods. Chen's expression turned serious. Oh, they will. That's why we need to keep changing them. This was just the first dance step, Admiral. Now we teach the Concorde to improvise. As reports of their victory spread throughout the fleet, Lizara watched the humans with new understanding. The Concorde had indeed turned to humanity in desperation, but perhaps, just perhaps, that desperation had led them to exactly the ally they needed. The trial by fire. The success at Koro's sector sent ripples through the galactic Concorde. For the first time in 18 months, the seemingly unstoppable advance of the Void Dominion had not merely been slowed, it had been reversed. The victory, modest though it was in strategic terms, had an effect on morale that transcended its tactical significance. In the 3 weeks that followed, the command deck of the Eternal Vigilance transformed from a chamber of somber resignation into something resembling a university seminar room. Admiral Lizara found herself presiding over meetings where humans and Concorde officers debated tactics with an energy that bordered on exuberance. Displays that once showed retreating defensive lines now featured bold offensive projections, and the strategic language itself had changed. The critical insight, Captain Chen explained to a gathering of Concorde fleet commanders, is that we're not fighting a single enemy. The Dominion may be a collective, but it's composed of distinct operational nodes that can be isolated and confused. A Volari captain raised a tentacle. Yet our intelligence suggests the Dominion has already begun modifying its communication protocols in response to Operation Curveball. Of course they have. Chen replied with a nod that suggested she'd expected nothing less. That's why we aren't going to repeat ourselves. Lieutenant Commander Okafor. The elegant human female stepped forward, her movements flowing with a quiet confidence that Lizara had come to associate with Earth's most effective officers. The Dominion expects us to employ electronic warfare again, Okafor explained. So instead, we're going to use what humans call a shell game approach. She gestured, and a holographic display showed a simulation of the combined fleets splitting into 5 distinct battle groups. Each group will utilize completely different tactical approaches, forcing the Dominion to counter multiple threats simultaneously. Dividing our forces contradicts every principle of defensive warfare, objected a Medusan commander, his crystalline form vibrating with skepticism. We're not playing defense anymore, Commander Jackson countered from his position near the tactical array. The Dominion has been dictating the tempo of this war since it began. Time to change that. Lizara watched with growing interest as the human officers outlined a coordinated offensive across 5 different sectors, each employing tactics drawn from Earth's surprisingly bloody military history. Guerrilla strikes based on something called Fabian strategy, decoy operations inspired by Cana, and fluid battle groups implementing blitzkrieg maneuvers. What troubles me, Lizara finally interjected, is that you're asking commanders to implement tactics they've never trained for, using formations they've never practiced. Chen's expression remained calm. That's why each battle group will be paired with human advisors who have studied these approaches extensively. And frankly, Admiral, unfamiliarity is an advantage here. The Dominion can't predict what you don't yet know how to do perfectly. High Chancellor Zrel, who had been observing silently until now, shifted his crystalline form into a pattern that signified cautious approval. The Koro's victory has bought us credibility with the Concorde Council. They have authorized full implementation of the Human Strategic Initiative. Chen nodded respectfully to the Chancellor, but Lizara detected a flicker of tension in the human's posture. There's something else, Lizara prompted. Yes, Chen acknowledged. I've requested permission for my ship, the Audacity, to undertake a special operation concurrent with the main offensive. What kind of operation? Lizara asked, her gill slits narrowing with suspicion. Intelligence gathering, Chen replied, meeting Lizara's gaze directly. We believe we've identified patterns in Dominion fleet movements that suggest the location of their central coordination hub. I want to take the Audacity to investigate. Alone. Lysara's chromatophores flashed with alarm. That would be suicide, Captain. Not alone, Chen corrected, with a small escort of volunteers. And not to engage, just to confirm the theory and gather tactical data on their command structure. Before Lysara could object further, Director Nor7 stepped forward, its obsidian frame gleaming under the command center lights. The Torn Collective has analyzed Captain Chen's hypothesis. While speculative, it contains a 73.8% probability of accuracy, significantly higher than any previous intelligence assessment regarding Dominion command infrastructure. The Audacity is uniquely suited for this mission, Chen continued. Our ship uses hybrid propulsion systems that don't match standard Concorde signatures, and we've developed specialized sensor masking technology based on Earth's oceanic predators. Lysara's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep consideration among the Ektari. You've been planning this since before Koros. Chen's smile was small but genuine. Humans have a saying, Admiral, hope for the best, plan for the worst. The Koros victory was essential, but we've always known it was just the first step. After a moment of silence, Chancellor Zerl spoke. I have authorized Captain Chen's mission. The main offensive will proceed simultaneously, both to achieve strategic objectives and to provide misdirection for the Audacity's operation. Lysara felt a complex mixture of emotions, concern for the seemingly reckless mission, respect for Chen's strategic foresight, and something else that took her a moment to identify.